What if I told you that the most powerful superfoods you've never heard of were buried by history, and they could still be growing in your backyard? These 15 forgotten medieval vegetables once saved lives, fueled armies, and fed kings. Yet today, we treat them like weeds. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll wonder why we ever let them disappear. Now, let's kick things off with a vegetable so regal, so revered it practically wore a crown. Skirret. Imagine this. You're a medieval peasant. The fields are frozen, the pantry's empty, and famine is knocking at the door. But then, you reach into the soil and pull out a slender, ivory root so sweet and delicious, it made even kings beg their gardeners to grow more of it. That, dear viewer, is skirret. Skirret was the lazy farmer's dream. Plant it once, forget about it, and come back later to a hidden jackpot of nutrition. It didn't need pesticides, fertilizers, or weekly motivational speeches like modern crops. It just grew. Flavor-wise, think of a carrot and a parsnip having a sweet vegetal baby, and that baby knows how to make a killer pie. That's right, medieval cooks used skirret not just in stews or roasts, but even in sweet pastries. Before potatoes came to Europe, skirret was the underground hero of root vegetables. But here's the twist. It vanished. Why? Because modern farming wanted big, fast, uniform crops. Skirret said, "Nah, I'm a vibe," and got left behind. As documented in 15th century garden guides and monastery cookbooks, skirret was described as the comfort of the poor man's table and a gift from God in frost. So next time you're nibbling on a baby carrot grown in a hydroponic lab, remember there was once a root that thrived in mud, fed kingdoms, and probably deserved its own cathedral. Ready for vegetable number 2? Buckle up, because it's wild, invasive, and tastes like celery with ambition. If vegetables had a rebellious older sibling, Alexander's would be it. This plant didn't wait to be invited into the medieval kitchen. It stormed in, kicked celery out of the pantry, and said, "I run this now." First brought to Britain by the Romans, Alexander's found medieval soil so welcoming that it never left. In fact, it started popping up everywhere, cliffsides, roadsides, abandoned castles, like a culinary squatters movement. What made this plant so special? Everything. Literally every part is edible. Medieval cooks ate the stems like celery, tossed the flowers into salads, ground the seeds as pepper, and added the leaves to stews for that mystery herb magic. The flavor? Imagine parsley and celery had a kid who's a little weird, but somehow makes everything better. It grew up to 6 feet tall with big yellow flowers that bees loved, making it the medieval version of an eco-influencer. Better yet, it needed zero attention. No fertilizer, no pruning. Alexander's just showed up, thrived, and left you with dinner. Despite all this, Alexander's got ghosted by agriculture around the 1700s. Celery showed up with its big watery energy and somehow won the public vote. Today, most people walk right past Alexander's growing in the wild, completely unaware they're ignoring a former medieval superstar. You know that quote, "Not all who wander are lost"? Yeah, Alexander's took that personally. Coming up next, a vegetable with a name worthy of a fairy tale king, and nutrition levels that would make spinach weep. Don't go anywhere. No one knows exactly who Good King Henry was, but if vegetables had royalty, this guy wore the crown and ran the kingdom. This humble green was once everywhere, in noble gardens, monastery plots, and wild fields from France to Germany. It was so easy to grow, it practically planted itself. If you've ever forgotten a plant and found it thriving anyway, congrats, you've got King Henry energy. Perennial, hardy, and impossible to kill, this plant made medieval survival just a little bit easier. Nutritionally, it put spinach to shame. More iron, high in vitamin C, and ready to harvest in early spring when other plants were still hitting snooze. During the hungry gap, those bleak early spring weeks when nothing grows, Good King Henry was literally a lifesaver. And talk about versatility. Young shoots were cooked like asparagus, mature leaves like spinach, and flower buds like tiny broccoli. It was like a medieval 3-in-1 kitchen gadget, except this one actually worked. Folk healers loved it too. Crushed leaves treated wounds, and tea from the root worked as a gentle laxative. In some places, People even called it all good, because apparently, super plant of infinite awesomeness didn't fit on parchment. So what happened? Like so many medieval MVPs, good King Henry was quietly pushed aside when industrial farming came along, demanding perfect rows and faster harvests. But if you're into gardening today, here's the twist: good King Henry still grows wild in parts of Europe. It's just waiting for someone to rediscover it. Coming up next, a medieval vegetable that tastes like oysters and was loved by monks, cooks, and hungry peasants alike. Yeah, it's weird. You'll love it. Let's be honest, when you bite into a vegetable, you don't expect it to taste like seafood. But Salsify said, "Hold my stew," and went full Poseidon on medieval taste buds. This root looks like a hairy stick with trust issues, but when you peel it, cook it right, and take a bite, bam, oyster vibes. That's why monks in the 1400s grew it in monastery gardens, to sneak past fasting rules. During Lent, when meat and fish were banned, Salsify stepped up to the plate, literally. There were two types, white Salsify and black Salsify. Both looked like something you'd ignore in a ditch. But beneath the ugly is culinary treasure. The real magic? This thing didn't care about winter. While other vegetables were frozen solid or dead, Salsify chilled underground like it had central heating. Medieval folks just dug it up as needed. No fridge, no pantry, just reach into the earth and pull out dinner. And once harvested, it lasted months. That's like having fresh seafood in the middle of February. In the 1300s, without the fish smell. So what happened? Why isn't it in your fridge right now? Because it grows slowly and looks weird. And modern farming doesn't have time for flavor if your roots aren't pretty. But if you can find it today, and yes, it still exists, you'll unlock one of medieval Europe's best-kept secrets. A root that tastes like shellfish and survives winter like a boss. Coming up next, a fruit so weird you have to wait for it to rot before eating it. And medieval people called that a dessert. You're not ready. Let's get one thing straight. Medlar is not your average fruit. It looks like a tiny, wrinkled brown apple that's seen some things and probably needs therapy. Fresh off the tree, it's rock hard and so bitter you'd rather chew on a shoe. But give it time to blet, that's medieval speak for controlled rotting, and it transforms. Once fully blet, the inside turns into what can only be described as medieval applesauce with a PhD in flavor. Medieval people loved this stuff. They waited weeks, yes, weeks just to eat it. Tarts, jellies, wines, if it was sweet and brown, Medlar was probably involved. It was basically the creme brulee of the Dark Ages, except instead of torching it, you just left it in a box until nature did its thing. But let's talk about the elephant in the orchard. Medlars look suspicious. Their anatomy earned them nicknames so crude even medieval monks blushed. Let's just say some people called them the open-arse fruit, and leave it at that. But don't judge a fruit by its bottom. Medlars ripened in late autumn, just when other fruits had vanished, making them the last sweet thing before winter's gloom. Once blet, they could be stored for weeks, providing rare sweetness when days were short, cold, and frankly depressing. So why did they vanish? Because people today want perfect fruit, shiny, firm, photogenic. Medlar said, "No thanks, I rot first, then I shine." But trust medieval taste buds on this one. Beneath that wrinkly exterior is one of the richest, strangest, most underrated desserts in European history. Up next, a plant that invaded every garden in Europe, got labeled a weed, and still managed to be one of the healthiest vegetables in the entire medieval diet. You've probably stepped on it. Let's talk about a plant that medieval farmers never invited to dinner, but somehow always showed up with a casserole and stayed for dessert. Chickweed didn't need permission to grow. It thrived in gardens, fields, and even between stones, like the medieval version of Wi-Fi, always there when you least expect it. Instead of fighting it, medieval folks wised up and said, "Hey, maybe this thing is here for a reason." Spoiler, it totally was. Chickweed is packed with vitamin C, like 7 times more than the same amount of oranges. Who needs citrus when you've got this tiny overachiever underfoot? Its tender leaves were harvested year-round in most parts of Europe, making it one of the few fresh greens available in cold months. Rich people ate it. Poor people ate it. Even the cows probably took a nibble. And it didn't stop at dinner. Medieval healers used chickweed for skin rashes, fevers, and inflammation. Its cooling properties were legendary. Basically, if your medieval body was freaking out, chickweed told it to chill. So why did it fall out of favor? Because modern farming hates freeloaders. Anything that grows too easily is called a weed and gets sprayed into oblivion. We replaced it with harder-to-grow crops that need more work, more money, and offer less nutrition. Genius. But here's the twist. Chickweed is still out there, doing its thing in secret. You've probably walked past it today. So next time you see a little green plant growing where it shouldn't be, maybe don't pull it. Maybe thank it. Coming up next, a vegetable with a name that sounds like a contagious disease, but it's actually a delicious, nutty root once beloved by monks and herbalists. Brace yourself for scorzonera. Scorzonera. Let's face it, that name sounds like something you'd catch on a bad field trip to a medieval swamp. But don't let the name fool you. Scorzonera isn't a curse. It's one of the most delicious, versatile root veggies you've never heard of. The name actually comes from the Italian scorzone, meaning venomous snake. Why? Because early herbalists thought it could cure bites. Spoiler alert, it didn't cure snakes, but what it did cure was hunger, bland food, and terrible winter diets. Scorzonera has a dark black skin, a straight, slender root, and white flesh inside, like a goth carrot with a better personality. When cooked, it has a subtle nutty taste with hints of asparagus and artichoke. Basically, it's what you'd serve at a fancy medieval brunch if you wanted to impress the local baron. But flavor wasn't even its best feature. This root could last all winter. Peasants harvested it in autumn, buried it in cool cellars, and enjoyed fresh vegetables long after everything else had turned into mold or regret. It was so valuable, monasteries planted entire patches of it, and not just for food. Medieval doctors brewed scorzonera tea to cleanse the blood and soothe upset stomachs. Because if it didn't kill snakes, at least it could calm your intestines. So why did we ghost this root? Because modern supermarkets want vegetables that look perfect, cook fast, and stack neatly in plastic bins. Scorzonera said, "Sorry, I've got character, but if you ever grow your own food or find it at a farmer's market, give this oddball root a second chance. It's nutritious, delicious, and maybe, just maybe, it'll save you from a snake." Coming up next, a plant that isn't Welsh and isn't really an onion, but somehow survived centuries of cold winters and still fed medieval families for a decade. The one and only Welsh onion. Let's start with the obvious. Welsh onions are neither from Wales nor technically onions. Basically, they're the medieval food version of a knockoff brand that somehow works better than the original. Despite the name confusion, this plant was a lifesaver for medieval farmers. Why? Because it's a perennial, meaning you plant it once, and it just keeps coming back year after year like that friend who never takes the hint but always brings snacks. Each plant multiplied into clumps, and with a little care, one could feed a family for 10 years. That's not a vegetable, that's a medieval subscription plan. Even better, it stayed green through harsh winters when other veggies tapped out and died. Peasants would cut the hollow green shoots and toss them into soups, stews, and anything that needed flavor and vitamins. It tasted like a mild scallion, with just enough bite to wake up your palate, but not enough to offend your noble guests. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't flashy, but it was faithful, and in medieval times that meant everything. So what happened? How did we go from planting the same onion for a decade to tossing green onions after 5 days in the fridge? Modern agriculture favored true onions, bigger bulbs, faster growth, prettier packaging. Welsh onion just quietly faded into the background, occasionally showing up in heritage gardens and confused recipe blogs. But here's the truth. If you want a plant that survives cold, comes back every year, and keeps feeding your family, it's time to bring Welsh onion home. Coming up next, a wild, uninvited plant that just showed up in medieval gardens and ended up feeding thousands and saving lives. Chickens loved it. Herbalists swore by it. It's time to meet fat hen. Fat hen might sound like a medieval insult, but don't let the name fool you. This plant was a nutritional powerhouse disguised as a garden intruder. It didn't wait for you to plant it. It didn't ask permission. It just appeared. in gardens, fields, roadsides, like a stubborn guest that shows up early and brings way more to the feast than expected. While other crops needed pampering, Fat Hen grew anywhere, any soil, any season. It was the freeloading MVP of medieval survival. Its leaves were rich in protein, more calcium than kale, more iron than spinach. If there were medieval nutrition labels, Fat Hen would have broken the chart. Even chickens loved it, hence the name. Hens fed on it laid more eggs and grew plumper, which meant more food for everyone. But Fat Hen wasn't just peasant food. Archaeological digs show it turned up in noble kitchens too, especially during famines, when imported luxuries dried up. Herbalists used it to treat fevers and inflammation. Ground seeds were baked into bread. When life gave you weeds, medieval folks made dinner and sometimes medicine. So what happened? How did this overachieving wild green get banished to the category of weed? Because it didn't fit the new rules. Neat rows, high yield, supermarket pretty. Fat Hen said nah and got cut out of the club. But here's the truth. This plant once saved lives. It grew for free, fed families, healed the sick, and it's still out there, waiting for us to recognize its worth again. Coming up next, a towering herb with the flavor of celery on steroids that flavored medieval feasts, cured stomach issues, and lived for 20 years. If you've never heard of lovage, your spice rack is missing a legend. Lovage isn't just a herb, it's the herb. The one herb to rule them all in medieval kitchens, gardens, and apothecaries. Imagine if celery went to the gym, studied herbal medicine, and joined a monastery. That's lovage. Its flavor is intense. Think celery, parsley, and lemon zest having an herbal fistfight. Medieval cooks didn't sprinkle it, they wielded it. And here's the best part. Every part of the plant was useful. Leaves for seasoning, stems for stews, seeds for bread, roots for boiling. Even the hollow stalks were candied into medieval sweets. If medieval recipes had fine print, it would have read, add lovage, or else it'll taste like sadness. Monasteries loved lovage. They grew it in nearly every garden and used it in medicine for everything from bloating to kidney pain to general bad humors. One herbal record called it a comfort to the stomach and a friend to digestion, which is medieval for, take this after your third roast goose. And let's talk longevity. Once you planted it, lovage kept growing for 20 years. That's not an herb. That's a legacy. It survived winter, came back stronger in spring. Honestly, we should have built statues to this thing. So why isn't it in every garden today? Because global trade brought in exotic spices, pepper, cinnamon, saffron, and lovage got shoved into the dusty corner of forgotten herbs. But let's be honest, your soup deserves better. Your stomach deserves better. Your medieval ancestors demand better. Bring back lovage. Coming up next, a wintergreen that has nothing to do with corn was eaten during snowstorms and contains more omega-3s than lettuce. Yep, it's time to clear up the confusion around corn salad. Let's get this out of the way. Corn salad contains zero corn. Nada. Zilch. Not even a kernel. Its name comes from where it grows. In fields of grain, which medieval Europeans called corn, before maize even existed on the continent. So congratulations to whoever named this plant. You've officially confused generations of salad lovers and Google searchers alike. Now that we've cleared that up, let's talk about what makes this humble green so incredible. Corn salad is one of the only greens that grows in winter. While everything else is dead or frostbitten, this little legend stays crisp and thriving. Its flavor is soft, mild, and slightly nutty. No bitterness, no drama, just pure green goodness. Medieval farmers knew its value. After the autumn grain harvest, these greens popped up naturally and were collected by anyone smart enough to recognize a gift from the gods. It was especially prized because it was one of the last fresh foods available before winter slammed the door shut. And get this, it has 3 times more omega-3s than iceberg lettuce, plus loads of iron and vitamin C. If medieval salads had Instagram bios, corn salads would read, cold hardy, nutrient dense, misunderstood. So what went wrong? Why did we ghost this crunchy winter miracle? because it doesn't look great on shelves. It wilts fast. It doesn't stack into plastic bins. And worst of all, the name still makes people think of side dishes at barbecues. But here's the thing, corn salad is still out there. It grows wild, it's easy to plant, and in the dead of winter, it might just be your leafy lifeline. Up next, the wildest, boldest, most aggressively flavored herb of the Middle Ages. Used in meats, puddings, cheese, and even beer, this plant was so intense, it basically yelled in every recipe. Meet tansy. Tansy wasn't just a herb. It was a flavor grenade with leaves. It tasted like a mashup of bitter greens, mint, black pepper, and regret, and somehow medieval cooks loved it. If parsley whispers and basil sings, tansy screams through a megaphone. This bushy, fern-leaved plant with bright yellow button flowers was everywhere, and it packed more flavor compounds than most modern spice racks. In medieval kitchens, it flavored meats, cheeses, and especially Easter puddings, where it added an herbal kick to sweet, creamy mixtures. One popular dish, tansy pudding, mixed the chopped leaves with breadcrumbs, eggs, cream, and sugar, then fried it like a leafy pancake. Spring cheese was often infused with tansy, giving it a sharp green taste that probably startled more than a few visiting nobles. They even used it in ale because nothing says celebration like beer that tastes like herbal thunder. But tansy wasn't just shouting in the kitchen, it yelled in the medicine cabinet too. It was used to treat intestinal parasites, reduce fevers, and repel insects. One herbal manual called it a purifier of foul humors and the gut alike. People even planted it near their doorways to keep flies away, medieval bug spray, but organic. So why did it vanish from our kitchens? Because it was too intense for modern tastes. Milder herbs like parsley and thyme took over. Tansy? Too extra. But for medieval folks, this herb wasn't loud. It was necessary. It flavored feasts, fought disease, and made sure spring dishes slapped after months of bland winter gruel. Coming up next, a coastal plant that required zero farming, grew in salty soil, and delivered more vitamin C than lemons. Say hello to sea kale, the quiet MVP of medieval survival. Most vegetables are divas. They need perfect soil, constant watering, protection from pests. Not sea kale. This plant grew in sand, salt, and suffering, and still came out delicious. Medieval coastal communities didn't cultivate it, they collected it. It was just there, like nature's way of saying, "You look hungry. Here." It grew along beaches and rocky shores where no other crops dared to survive. Basically, the Bear Grylls of leafy greens. And the nutrition? 6 times more vitamin C than lemons. In a time when scurvy wasn't just real, it was terrifying. Seafarers and coastal peasants alike used it to stay alive during the long winter months, and during sea voyages when fresh food was a distant dream. Culinarily, it was a total 2-for-1. Blanched young shoots in spring were cooked like asparagus. Mature leaves in summer were boiled like cabbage. Mild, slightly nutty, and never bitter, it was the comforting green medieval people didn't have to work for. And best of all, no plowing, no planting, no praying for rain. Just show up and eat. So why don't we eat it today? Because it's wild. Because it grows in places we don't farm. And because we forgot that some of the best food doesn't come from a field, it comes from the edge of the world. If you live near a coast in Europe, chances are, sea kale is still there, waiting quietly in the sand, just like it always has. Coming up next, a strange plant with a secret identity. It dyed medieval fabrics blue and fed entire villages in spring. Was it a food? A chemical? A miracle? Meet woad, the plant with a double life. Woad had an identity crisis before it was cool. On one hand, it fed medieval villagers. On the other, it turned their tunics, flags, and battle paint a legendary shade of blue. It was the plant equivalent of a double agent. One day in your soup, the next on your war paint. Woad leaves were harvested young in spring, before their dye compounds developed. That's when they were edible, mild, slightly peppery, like mustard greens but less dramatic. Medieval folks tossed the fresh leaves into soups and salads, or sautéed them like spinach. Boom, free spring greens with a hint of spice. But when woad matured, it got weird. Really weird. Ferment the older leaves, dry them, and grind them up, and you got a blue dye so vibrant it became a medieval status symbol. Woad-dyed garments were a mark of wealth and craftsmanship, and woad warriors? They looked terrifying on the battlefield. There was just one problem: dyeing with woad stank. Like Royal Decree Bandit from Town Center stank. The process required fermenting the leaves with, you guessed it, urine. The result? Brilliant blue cloth and a stench that could kill. So why did people put up with the smell? Because before synthetic dyes, woad was the only game in town if you wanted to look awesome in blue. And while the older plants stunk, the younger ones were a seasonal blessing, fresh greens after a long, hungry winter. Today, woad is mostly forgotten, replaced by chemical dyes and trendy kale. But in the Middle Ages, it was a symbol of survival, power, and sometimes salad. Coming up next, a vegetable you think you know, but you're probably ignoring the best part. It wasn't the root medieval folks loved the most. It was the leaves. Let's talk turnips and why their greens deserve your respect. Turnips have a branding problem. Everyone remembers the root, but nobody talks about the leafy green crown sitting right on top like it's just decoration. But in the Middle Ages, turnip greens weren't a garnish. They were a lifeline packed with calcium, vitamin A, iron, and protein. In fact, they had 4 times more calcium, 3 times more vitamin A, and twice the protein of the root below. Medieval peasants knew better than to waste anything, so they carefully harvested the outer greens during the growing season without harming the developing root. The result? Year-round greens for soup, stew, and salad, long before zero-waste cooking became trendy. Turnip greens were peppery, hearty, and added flavor to otherwise bland winter meals. In a world without spice racks or grocery stores, that was gold. And when times got tough, people didn't have the luxury of discarding edible greens. They ate everything, and often, it was the greens that kept them alive. Meanwhile, we modern humans chop off the best part and toss it into the bin like it's trash. Medieval ghosts are judging us hard right now. Want a real superfood? Forget the imported powders. Grow some turnips. Eat the greens. Congratulations, you've just unlocked medieval-level nutrition. And there you have it. 15 forgotten vegetables that once fed kings, saved peasants, healed the sick, and kept humanity going when times were rougher than a knight's morning breath. Modern farming may have passed them by, but they're still out there, growing in hedgerows, hiding in wild meadows, waiting in seed catalogs. Resilient, reliable, rooted in history. Want to eat like your ancestors? Want flavor, survival, and a touch of medieval magic on your plate? Start by looking backward, because the future of food might just be hiding in the past. The end of the forgotten feast, but just the beginning of your rediscovery.